So I'm getting at the point with this 2-point octave mandolin where I'm working on bending the binding, which is these pieces of curly maple. I've gone ahead and bent them. And I've done the binding channel. Now before you just kind of fit them in and glue them, there's some steps that I always like to take before I do that. Obviously, you want to make sure each piece is labeled, because I think it's super easy, again, like most things during this process, to mix up the pieces and then they're not matching and then you're just chasing your tail. So always label the pieces. So like this piece, I actually drew arrows on it to tell me which way is up for the piece, and then I write treble so that I know it's facing up, it's on the treble side. And then I always make sure to sand the part that's gonna be glued. So two sides of the piece are gonna be glued. This vertical part and then the horizontal part. So I always sand each piece level sand them on a level surface. And then I actually will kind of round this inside corner that's gonna be glued. It just kind of helps it snug in there a bit more. And another thing on that note is you have the binding ledge, and you want to make sure that it's square. You don't want it to be like, if the spruce was kicking out like that, it's going to be really hard to glue into that surface. So have a nice square ledge that your wooden binding is going to be fitting into, and then that coupled with this inside gluing corner being rounded, it should fit in nice and snug. Wood binding has a lot of challenges, I think, obviously, than plastic. Plastic is a pretty easy binding material. I don't think it looks as good, but that's another discussion. The wood binding, it just takes a lot more time to fit it, and letting it dry a bit longer before you sand it back. Always have extra pieces of material milled down, so if you do snap a piece, you can just bend another piece of binding. So I have a little nice pile there. So yeah, the big things: label each piece. I use arrows, and then base treble side. Level the two glue surfaces and round that inside corner. And then also checking where it's going to be glued into. I think if you do those things, then it should set up pretty smoothly as far as like puzzle pieces fitting together. If you do mess up, and let's say you fit the piece in, you glue it, take the tape back, and it just looks bad, I mean, it's easy enough, assuming you still have like a nice square ledge. It should be easy enough where you can just either chisel the unfortunate piece of binding off, or you could reroute it or use the hand method, and just redo it. Like, why not? So those are the biggest piece of advice. Little tools I like to use. I like to use this ruler, not just for measuring, but the very end of this ruler is a nice convenient little square. So it's perfect for checking the ledges of the binding. So it's also good, like feeler gauge. And then I also like to use just like an X-Acto blade, super handy. Make sure it's sharp. You can always sharpen it yourself too if it gets dull with like a diamond stone or like super fine sandpaper if you don't have diamond stones. And also just have a little, they're cheap to buy, so you can just buy more. And then I use these little like dog ear or dog neck, whatever they're called. Something to do with the dog, some canine related term for these little micro chisels. Mechanical pencil, and then for my oscillating spindle sander, it has these rubber spindle things that the sleeves go over. I find they're useful to kind of work and fitting into some of the curves, and I'll kind of sit it on the ledge and I'll kind of rotate it, keeping it vertical. Like, you don't want to create a new slant or anything, but they can be useful in that regards. And then I'll use some files sometimes to square up edges. So it is a lot of prep work, but that's just kind of part of it. I think it's worth it to get the wood binding appearance for sure. And I think the plastic over time, it just, like, I've seen Martin guitars or other guitars where, like, eventually that plastic binding does kind of start to peel off, and it's just kind of this unsightly mess. So, and I think the wood binding just kind of ties everything together to be one cohesive unit, which I think instruments need to be the best version of themselves. So, so that's my spiel on binding or wood binding. I'll probably do another video on using like plastic bindings. I have some like faux tortoiseshell binding I'll be doing on a mandolin soon, and I'll also show other steps of how I install this binding onto here. So if this is useful and you want to follow along, make sure to subscribe, check back frequently. I'm trying to get a bunch of content information out to everybody so people can be learning and trying new skills, and hopefully this will save you guys some trial and error, to say the least. So